Hola a todos, ¿qué tal estáis? Today I would like to make a video in English and basically talk about some tips that I think would be helpful for you guys if you're learning Portuguese. So this is primarily for people that already speak Spanish, don't have to be native speakers, but should have a pretty good level. And yeah, so these are tips for Spanish speakers learning Portuguese. So let's start with number one. First of all, study the patterns and be willing to make hypotheses in novel situations. So there's a lot of predictable patterns of how we can convert or change our Spanish into Portuguese. So for example, whenever we see something like ending in ável, right, then we can probably have a pretty good idea that it's going to end in ável in Portuguese. Same thing, ción is going to have this ending são, right? And usually things like ending in cia are going to be like sa. So confiable is probably confiável. Even without looking up the dictionary entry, I can probably bet that confiable is confiável. Sometimes I'll be wrong, and maybe I am, but I should be willing to make those hypotheses, right? Just throw it out there. Canción, right? We know that it's canção, right? But there's a lot of other ones that maybe I've never encountered this word before. I can probably have a good idea that we are talking about, for example, diversión is probably going to be diversão. So be willing to make these hypotheses based on the statistical likelihood of a given ending. So yeah, number two, learn the pronunciation. So Spanish and Portuguese share a huge amount of words, lexicon, and grammar, but there are major differences in the pronunciation that might make it harder for you to understand what people are saying. So start with the consonants, things like the S, right? Especially if you're learning European Portuguese or Rio Portuguese, it's very important that you guys start with the S. Let me see if I can open this window a little bit, get some more natural light in here. Start with the S. So I mean, one of the things that was hardest for me in Portuguese was learning the S, especially European Portuguese and Rio Portuguese, which changes that S into variably S, Z, or sh. So learn the S, learn the R, right? In the region whose Portuguese you're speaking, do they say R, or do they say R, or do they say something else? Learn the L, right? Especially the final L. How do you pronounce pswal, for example? Do you say pswal or pswal? Learn the V sound. This is the one thing that I think I've talked about in my other videos, but learning this V sound. This is an area where speaking English is probably going to help you guys a lot if you speak any English, because it's the same. B's are B with different degrees of softening, and the V's are V. So, a verdade, yeah? So, the final thing, and this is the most important part of pronunciation, right? And it's going to help you a lot with your how well you understand the language, is the final M. The final M that's written down in words like eles falam. Notice that it's not falam, but falam. When I say right? Notice it's not there's no closure of the lips. It's So this is one of the things that's really going to give you away as a non-native speaker of Portuguese, or as a beginner speaker of Portuguese, if you pronounce this final M, right? So final M appearing at the end of the word, is going to be for EM, falem, for AM, falam, and there's going to be a couple, what is it? Ruim, I am, ruim, right? That's going to be almost that NG sound. But notice there's never any M. There's no m at the end of words, okay? couple tools that really helped me with my Portuguese, especially my pronunciation, were 2 programs that I bought that you can either buy online or conseguir apañar online, which would be Pimsleur Portuguese, and also Behind the Wheel Portuguese. So Behind the Wheel, I've used it. It's really good. Definitely recommend those. It'll help you a lot with your pronunciation. Third tip, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Take note of them when you're corrected. Then be willing to commit the same mistakes again, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. For me, I know that one of the areas that was really hard for me was learning the difference between maior, menor, mais pequeno, and mais novo, right? So I guess they use mais novo for younger and maior for bigger, but never mais grande. People have a big pet peeve with mais grande. So these types of things, I've made a million mistakes, and you should continue to make mistakes until you get it right. All right? Next tip, trust your Spanish. So a lot of books advocate that teachers avoid terms like portuñol and encourage their students to divorce all thoughts from Spanish when they're learning Portuguese. But I actually disagree. I think that inadvertently speaking a little bit of portuñol is a necessary part of moving between 2 linguistic systems that are very similar. So Spanish speakers should always trust their knowledge of Spanish before their knowledge of other languages. There's a few exceptions, like for example, we can take from the English, we can transplant certain sounds like the B and the V, right? But in general, you know, we don't want the end goal to be speaking portuñol. But I think that it's okay when you're first learning, you're going to use your Spanish. You know, and there's times that you're going to say yo instead of eu, right? Completely normal, don't beat yourself up over it, but you should notice. Say, oh, I said eu instead of saying yo. So yeah, don't beat yourself up for Spanish-like errors, but instead congratulate yourself when you make a correct hypothesis. Even when you make an incorrect hypothesis, don't beat yourself up. Say, hey, I was willing to make a hypothesis. So, final tip, and probably the most important, listen to a ton of Portuguese. Because you speak Spanish, you're already going to be able to understand a lot of spoken Portuguese. I would start with something simple. Maybe start watching a series that you like in Portuguese. So, for example, if I'm a big fan of 24, or I don't know, I'm watching Adventure Time right now, and this fantastic 10-minute chunks full of language. I watch it first in English and then in Portuguese. Sometimes I watch it Portuguese first, and yeah, it's a really great way to help train your ear. But you need to listen more than you ever thought possible. I mean, if there's one thing that I want to impress upon the people that very kindly subscribe to and support my channel, is that probably one of the reasons why my Spanish is at a high level relative to a lot of speakers, especially my pronunciation, is not only having lived in the country, but having listened to a ton of input. So, for example, in Portuguese, I have never once stepped foot in a Portuguese-speaking country, and yet my Portuguese, at least the pronunciation, if not the actual communication, is fluent enough for people to think that I'm from Portugal, especially Brazilians. When they talk to me, they always say, "Oh, are you from Portugal?" And then they realize that kind of some of my word constructions are not entirely Portuguese, like maybe got some portuñol in there. But yeah, listen to a ton of Portuguese and get in the habit of stopping your tape when you're listening and saying, "Hey, what was that word?" Maybe rewind it again, and then try and figure things out through the context. All right, hope this video was helpful, and si queréis el video en español, porque creo que tendría sentido, ¿no? Nada, me lo indicáis y lo traduzco al español. Venga, más o menos son 5 tips, dicas, quiero decir. Joder, tips en español, son algunas sugerencias, ¿no? Joder, se me está yendo el español. Bueno, hasta ahora. Chao.